some thoughts that I had that I wanted to kind of work through verbally. Was about misunderstandings, and it's like one of my compulsions, I think, in this life has been to learn language well enough so that I can properly express myself, because English is my second language, and it's taken me many years to really come to a point where I have a good enough understanding of the language, not just vocabulary wise, but also just having the quick access to words and sort of understanding the grammar and kind of understanding the feeling level of how certain phrases and things land in other people, in other people's minds. And so it's the frustration of having this inner world is this immense inner world going on inside, and feeling the reality, the realistic expectation of somebody actually being able to understand me, is rather low. The likelihood of actually being understood correctly, because the first barrier being my own ability to sort of put into words where I am emotionally, and just having sort of a persona that is comfortably able to interact with people, where I'm it's sort of like a initial landing strip where you're you're not in the other country yet. You're technically in the other country, but you're sort of in a transit place where it's it's like a neutral ground. It's kind of like you're at an embassy or something. And most people sort of hang out at the embassy together, and there's it's like a place where they feel comfortable. So finding that sort of embassy within myself to relay what it is that I feel, or what it is that I think, and to feel comfortable with that. That's often been a struggle, to sort of find ways of expressing myself that doesn't necessarily make people uncomfortable, or make them confused, or make them wonder, why the hell is he talking about this stuff? This is so not normal, this guy's fucking weird. But part of it is too just having to be comfortable with the fact that most people are probably going to think that if they get some sense of what I'm that they're probably going to be a little bit confused, and that they might think that I am weird. And maybe it is. I mean, technically I am weird because I'm unusual. So weird is unusual. So yes, I suppose. But what I was thinking about before I started recording this was sort of misunderstandings, more on a relationship level, where you've gotten to know the people a little bit better, and now you kind of like have some kind of, interactions, more frequent interactions with them. And I've often felt sort of compelled, like when I felt misunderstood, I felt compelled to like try to explain what it is that I was really trying to say. But I was just thinking about this, like when somebody misunderstands us, who's at fault, really? If they get angry at us and we had no intention of being disrespectful to them, but they heard something else than what was said. And so like the temptation is to try to clarify it. And like sometimes if they're if people are receptive, they'll you'll explain it to them and then they sort of get it on the second pass. But a lot of times people didn't actually want to understand you correctly in the first place. And so then when you try to go to explain it further to them, instead of being like, hey, I misunderstood you, now I'm going to give you the opportunity to like rectify my misunderstanding, because partly the fault is in me for not being present enough to really follow you. And so like that's like what you would call a good faith, an act of good faith, but a lot of misunderstanding is done in bad faith. Like a lot of people, they didn't really want to understand you in the first place, and so yes, like technically they misunderstood you, but because their intention wasn't really to understand you, when you go to try to explain what it was that you really meant, now you've kind of fallen into their trap, and now you're like playing, you're fighting, you're playing their game, and you're on their territory, and now they can sort of like do this sort of dance around you and convince you not only did you that you said something that you didn't say, but that you had intentions that you didn't have. And now you're like on the hook, and you like constantly have to like prove it to them, like you have to prove that. It's now it almost like turns into like that you have to prove that you're not a bad guy, that you're not a villain, that your intentions are pure. And then you like have to do like not only it's like there's no point at which you end up feeling understood, and now like the conversation shifts to like, well, what is you did something wrong, and so now you have to like do something to make it better, and now you're like on the hook to like provide something for them, like a token or like some kind of service of contrition. And now they've like fooled you into thinking that like now not only do you feel like frustrated because you feel misunderstood, but now you're like, hey, wait a minute, like why? It's like, why do I have to like do this shit now? Like, why do I have to like do this activity or give this person this service that is like it's like I'm rewarding them for not being present, and I'm rewarding them now for being obstreperous and difficult and obtuse, and and it's like, yeah, relationships like that, like people where people play these kinds of games, it's like, if there's a misunderstanding, who's really at fault? Is it the person who's like sincerely coming from sincerity, or is it like the person who's just, not on the first of all, they're not present enough to really like hear what it is that you have to say, and then on the more sinister level, they're like trying to use their this sort of act of like having misunderstood you as an opportunity to like gain something from you, that in a sort of like backhanded, Machiavellian sort of way. So yeah, anyway, just some thoughts here in the beautiful morning of this day, and starting to feel better. Sort of day 4 of caffeine withdrawal. A few days ago, I was drinking a lot of coffee, and I noticed like some of like the phlegm and the like throat irritation that I was having was probably like had to do with like the coffee, and so I cut the coffee off. But then I like switched to energy drinks, and energy drinks just have way too much caffeine, and so then I kind of got hooked on energy drinks. And then I was like, okay, well now I gotta, then I just like kept feeling really wiped out, sort of from midday to like late at night. And it's like at a certain point, like even drinking an energy drink just wasn't like bringing me back, my energy. I was just feeling tired, and so I like cut those out. Now I'm drinking tea, which is great, and I don't know, starting to feel a lot better. Anyhow, have a good one.